Thank you for your patience here. We're going to go ahead and get started. So first, we're going to start with some housekeeping items and also the purpose of the event. So thank you everyone for being here. So the purpose of this event is to learn about the Michigan Supreme Court electoral race, and hear from candidates. We'll begin with introductions. So from myself, and then others who are leading this event today, and then we'll go into candidate introductions. So the candidate question portion will be split into two parts. So there will be the first section at 6:30, till 6:30, I'm sorry, till about 6:35. And then the second portion will be from 7 to 7:30. And then in between that, we will have a portion where we hear from some community organizations, what they're doing, how you can get involved in electoral work, and why this Supreme Court race matters to them. So first I'll start. My name is Alexandria. I'm Supreme Court Coordinator with Michigan Liberation. Michigan Liberation is a nonprofit organization that works in mass incarceration and mass policing throughout Michigan. And we focus on leadership development also of directly impacted folks by the criminal justice system. Okay. And then I know we have some other panelists on that I do want to allow to introduce themselves. So I'll send it over to Erica first. She's ready.
Hi, everybody. My name is Erica Cederberg. I am a field volunteer coordinator for Michigan Liberation, and I feel that the Supreme Court election is very important. So thank you all for coming to join us today.
Thank you very much. And then I believe we have tech support as well. Some people on for that. Want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Steph T. She, her pronouns. I'm the executive assistant for Michigan Liberation. Thank you all for your time, and I look forward to the great dialogue that we'll all have tonight.
And I believe we have some other people on, but from Mothering Justice, I believe. Thank you for your patience. Oh, yes, they are here. Okay. Right. Yes, I'm Aisha Wells.
Hi, how are you guys doing today? I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I hear you.
My name is Aisha Wells. I'm from Mothering Justice. I'm also joined here today with Christina Hayes, who will talk more about the work that Mothering Justice is doing. We appreciate this opportunity of allowing us to be on today because we understand viscerally, being in the community that we're in, the community that we serve, how very important it is to for these races that are coming up this fall, in about a month, actually. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, and then Christina, go ahead.
I guess it would work if I take myself off mute, right? But hello, everyone. I am a my name is Christina, and I am a state paid leave organizer with Mothering Justice. And we do a lot of political work, and we know the importance, of course, with having the Michigan Supreme Court and who is in office there. So we are grateful to be here today.
Thank you very much. Glad you guys are here today. Yes. Okay. So let's move right through here. Okay, I guess we can transition into the candidate question portion. Sorry, cannot talk today. But first, I wanted to hear from candidate Richard Bernstein. Go ahead and introduce yourself and why you are running for the Supreme Court seat.
Sure. So good evening, everybody. And first off, I love that you're having this forum. It is so important. And I guess the main reason why I'm running is because You know, I think at the end of the day, I think a question needs to be asked, which is, so what are the qualities that make a good justice? I mean, at the end of the day, what you're doing here is you're making decisions that are affecting people's entire lives. You're affecting every aspect of their life. So what is it that goes into having this position that allows for you to render such verdicts? And I think at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is our life experiences. And I'm a person of faith, and I have come to believe that God gives us our life experiences for a purpose and for a reason. And when you ask why a person is running, and most importantly, when you ask what qualities must a person have that allow for them to serve in this position and serve in this position well, there is really only one answer, which is the understanding and appreciation of what it means to struggle. Because I think why we start to have some of these challenges, some of these problems are when you have folks that are in positions who don't really understand that notion of struggle, who don't understand what it's like to be different, who don't understand what it feels like to be discriminated against, who don't have to contend with that each and every day. So at the end of the day, the reason why I'm running for this position is because I have a love and an admiration for people, and I want to make life better for people. But I believe that it's important to take those experiences that God gives us and use them for something profound to make an impact and to have an effect.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, so I guess we'll go right into our questions then. So the first one we have for you, what kind of future would you build if you had all the tools?
Well, I think as it pertains to the judicial system, that's a beautiful question. I think what the judicial system really needs more than anything is everybody has to have a voice. Everybody needs to be represented. Everyone has to have access. And I think what it really comes down to is that ultimately the way that our system is working right now is it's limiting in terms of who gets access to it. And what does that mean? Of course, if you're charged with a crime, the idea is that you're supposed to have counsel. You're supposed to have representation. But I think the essence of why we're all here and the focal point as to why everybody cares with the deep concern that they do is the inequality. And what does that mean when you have inequality? Okay, you're charged with a crime. But at the end of the, but what ultimately happens is that when the state is ultimately prosecuting you, the state has unlimited resources, unlimited, as it pertains to their investigative power, as it pertains to their legal power. They basically have an unlimited repertoire of resources at their disposal. And so many people who wind up going into the criminal justice system don't have access to that level and scope of resources. In fact, and we'll get into this in your other questions, but I figure why don't I just dive in, right? Because I think that's the real essence that people care about. But what sometimes happens so often within the criminal justice process is that if a defendant wishes to conduct their own investigation, remember the government has unlimited resources, but if a defendant wants to conduct their own investigation, they have to petition the court to get a private investigator. And they have to basically justify why they're having a private investigator. And the last thing I'll say about this is in the civil context, not just in the criminal context, but in the civil context, you have so many people who simply don't have access to the system. And that's where ultimately you have a lot of problems, whereas in housing, in all different types of areas, we could go through them. Housing, I think, is going to be the biggest. But what tends to happen is that if you don't have representation, if you don't have access to representation, let's bifurcate the criminal situation from the civil situation. But in the civil situation, you have a lot of folks who would like to have a voice, who would like to be heard, and who would like to basically stand up for themselves. But because the way that the structure is done, they don't have the access to the legal counsel that they need. If you don't go to you can go to a clinic, you can go, to different other areas, Legal Assistance Foundation. But at the end of the day, there are so many people who have so many injustices who deserve to be heard and need to be represented, but they're not. So in answering your question, basically, if you had the tools to do this, you would make sure, I got asked this question earlier today, do we have enough of these cases? Does the court take up enough of these cases? And the answer is the court can only take up the cases that are filed. So what it really comes down to is, do you have enough people filing these cases? Do you have enough people representing folks who need it? Because that's really the cornerstone of what this is all about, is representation and access to it.
Thank you so much for your answer. Thank you very much. Yes, so the next question we have for you is, how do you define the law versus ethics?
So
Do you
that's,
see this as different or the same?
that's an
Yeah, go
excellent
ahead.
question. No, that is an outstanding question. At the end of the day, when you're a judge, you have to be a judge, because that's my goal. My goal is to be the absolute best judge that there is. That's my goal. I'm the first blind justice in the state of Michigan, and my goal is to do this job, but most importantly, I need to do this job well. And I want people to say, you know what? Judge Bernstein is an excellent judge. What is it that makes an excellent judge? That you're fair. That is the absolute most important thing, is that when people come in front of you, they might agree or disagree with your findings. They might agree or disagree with your decision, but they have to walk away and they have to say, you know what? The judge treated me fairly. That is absolutely critical to the foundational underpinnings of how our system ultimately works. So in answer to your question, the two sometimes have to be different. And the reason for that is that there's a number of opinions that I've had to be a part of where I really don't like the result, in fact, I hate the result. And often is the case that when I write an opinion that way, I actually signal to that. I basically say, this is a result that I truly do not agree with. But as a judge and as a person who ultimately has to adhere to the law, I have to do my work and basically interpret the law. So what ultimately happens is there's a number of opinions that basically go to that, where I call out the legislature and basically say, look, this is an unacceptable result, but I have to get to this result because you gave me no other choice but to do that. And I'm pointing out to you why this has to be amended or this has to be changed.
Thank you so much for your answer. Let's see, we have, so the next question. Yes, can you describe your views on safety of public schools?
That's a great
School
question. I
system
love it.
and violence.
So the question you ask is my views as it pertains to like the safety of public schools.
Yeah, so yeah, describing your views on how safety relates to public schools, how violence plays into that. Yeah.
Sure. So let me give you a case right on point. And this is a case that I feel incredibly strong about. It's basically the Michigan gun owners versus the Ann Arbor Public Schools. Let me talk about this case because your question is outstanding and it really goes to the essence of why these positions matter, why elections matter, and ultimately the impact that the Supreme Court ultimately has. So let me take you back. You had basically the question that was being posed by Michigan gun owners as they challenged the Ann Arbor Public Schools was that school districts should not have the ability to regulate what, if any, weapons are brought into a school. That if a basic local district wishes to basically put forth rules and regulations that govern what type of weapons are brought into a school, the Michigan gun owners were arguing that they should not have the ability or the power to do that. And that ultimately, that this is something which is found within the state constitution and the federal constitution, so there can be no regulation. So here's the thing, what that meant in a practical manner was that they were basically arguing that if you're a person that wants to go into a school with an AR-15, that the local district should not be able to regulate that behavior or be able to regulate that conduct. And the court held, and I want to emphasize this, the court held in a 4-3 decision. And this is important. It wasn't 7-0. It wasn't 6-1. It wasn't 5-2. It was 4-3. 4-3. And we ultimately held in this decision that, of course, local school districts could regulate. It had the power to regulate what type of weapons a person could bring into a school, that this was the power of the local district to basically make that determination and make that decision. But here's the thing. If the court had gone the other way, just by one vote, the practical implication of that would be that a school district would not be able to regulate what weapons somebody brings into a school. What does that mean? Ultimately, if you wanted to go into any school in the state of Michigan and you had a license to carry and you had an AR-15 that you were carrying, let's say you had an AR-15 on your left shoulder, you could have an AR-15 on your right shoulder, you could have an AR-15 on your front. You could walk in with as many AR-15s as you want. If the court had gone the other way by one vote, just by one vote, it could have been 4-3 the other way. And what would ultimately have happened is that the school district would not have had the power to regulate that kind of behavior, which means that if it had gone just one vote the other way, the school district could not prevent you or a person from bringing an AR-15 onto campus and into a classroom.
Thank you very much. And for the next question, in terms of accessibility and communication with Michigan residents, what do you see as the appropriate amount of accessibility and transparency to the community as a justice?
So here's my cell number, 248-866-2959. 248-866-2959. That is my direct cell number. That comes right to me. You don't have to go through my office. You don't have to go through a clerk. If you call that telephone number, you will get me directly. I basically give out my cell number to everybody. And I believe that the accessibility should be the total accessibility. And that's why one of the things that I love to do is I love to travel the state of Michigan, basically crisscrossing the state, go north to south, south to north, east to west. And I think what is absolutely critical about being a Supreme Court justice is that you have to be open and available to everybody at all times. That's just the way it is. And please feel free to call me. Now, the only favor I'm going to ask is sometimes it takes me a little bit of time to get back to folks. So like, just because, the day is so full and there's so much stuff going on that I try to get back with people within 24 hours when they call. But if it takes maybe 48 hours, especially with everything going on at the court, that you'll understand that it might take a day or two to get back. But when people call me, I call them back, and I like to hear what's going on and understand what's going on. If I can't help, I can't help. But the key is that I like to know what's happening, because the more that you know as a Supreme Court justice what's taking place, what's occurring, the more you can actually make a difference. Because at the end of the day, what this entire job comes down to is people, understanding people, connecting with people. But most importantly, what is this job about? This job is about serving people.
Thank you very much. Yes. Appreciate your answer. And I do see some questions in the chat. Would you by chance be able to say the number again, just so I can?
248-866-2959.
Thank you very much. Okay, and then just going to pivot to some questions in the chat, just to make sure these are able to be asked. Here's one. What would you say is the most pressing issue facing Michigan today?
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, I would have to say it from this perspective is there are many issues that are currently facing Michigan today. I would say that ultimately, I think what is important to note from that question is that this is the key thing. If there's like a takeaway from our time together today, it would be this. It would be that the Michigan Supreme Court is the absolute last word in all of the issues that are deeply personal to everybody here in this state. That's your takeaway, that the Michigan Supreme Court is the absolute last word in all issues that have a direct impact and a direct effect on people in the most personal and intimate capacity. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's dive in, right? What is it that is we're going to be the last word on? Well, I think a lot of folks already kind of saw that. As it pertains to reproductive rights, we're the last word. We're the last word. Basically, at the end of the day, what tends to happen is that you can have a number of people advocating. You can have the governor advocate, you can have the attorney general advocate, you can have a number of folks that can advocate what their position is. You can have a number of people putting forth arguments as to what their position is. But the Michigan Supreme Court will make the absolute final decision as it pertains to reproductive rights. And let's just look at kind of ultimately how this is going to work. Another key thing that I think is absolutely critical for folks to be aware of is that the road to the White House goes directly through the Michigan Supreme Court. And you're thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, how is this connected? How is it that the road to the White House goes directly through the Michigan Supreme Court? The answer is this: just like what ultimately happened with the question about abortion going on the ballot, the way that this all works is ultimately that if you, as what happened here with the abortion question, and again, I have to be very careful. I am not taking a position. I want to be very careful of that. The judges cannot. So under no circumstance am I taking any position. I'm just discussing procedurally these issues that are currently before the court as it pertains to your question. But really what people have to think about as it pertains to voting rights, as it pertains to reproductive rights, is ultimately the state Supreme Court will decide the constitutional question as it pertains to who can vote, how they vote, where they vote, the way they vote, the process in which they vote, how a ballot is created, who counts the ballots, who has access to the ballots. Every facet and every component about how an election is going to be administered and how an election is going to be run is the sole purview of the Michigan Supreme Court. Case at hand, Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a 4-3 Republican Supreme Court. Michigan has a 4-3 Democratic court. In the state of Wisconsin, 4-3 Republican court, the court recently held that drop boxes are going to be unconstitutional for use in the state of Wisconsin. What I can assure you of is that every elections case that is of significance, that is going to have an impact on how the election is going to be administered, those types of issues that are facing Wisconsin, I would think in Delaware, the Delaware trial court just ruled that ultimately, this is a fascinating ruling. Now we'll see what the Delaware Supreme Court says, and I'm not taking a position of any kind, but the Delaware trial court held that mail-in ballots are going to be unconstitutional, that basically voting by mail is unconstitutional. Once a state Supreme Court determines something to be unconstitutional, that's the end of the discussion. So since the Wisconsin Supreme Court said that drop boxes are unconstitutional, drop boxes are unconstitutional. If the Delaware Supreme Court were to say that mail-in voting is unconstitutional, then mail-in voting is going to be unconstitutional. I'm just going to say very quickly, because I know I'm going on for a while, but I really like this group because this is a group that, we're going to get technical. We're going to get into the weeds. You all understand why this is so important. So I figure, you know what, let's dive in and explain it in a very technical, highly sophisticated approach so that people know what the stakes are and what's really happening. But very quickly, where you saw what basically happened here in Michigan was that for something to get certified, let's just take, for example, the abortion question as it pertains to whether or not it goes on the ballot, you had 700,000 signatures that were submitted. And everyone just basically would think, okay, if you have 700,000 signatures, doesn't it just automatically go on the ballot? I mean, with all these signatures, doesn't it just go? No, it does not, because ultimately it doesn't go on the ballot until it gets certified. And who is it that certifies it? The Board of Canvassers. What happened 2 weeks ago? The Board of Canvassers deadlocked. Under the state constitution, you have 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. You have to have a majority of the Board of Canvassers in order for something to be certified. Since you had a deadlock of 2-2, it did not go on the ballot. It was then required for the Supreme Court to have to rule on it to allow for this constitutional question to ultimately go on the ballot. Same thing with promote the vote, deadlocked 2-2. So it was up to the Supreme Court to determine if that would ultimately go on the ballot. The Supreme Court.
And I'm sorry to cut you off, but I do want to make sure I can ask another.
You got it. You cut me off at the absolute perfect point.
What are your views on restorative justice? And there's a second part to that. And how does the Supreme Court promote restorative justice?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I think what it really comes down to is all the things that we basically were talking about. If I'll give you a shorter answer, I think it really just comes down to everything that we're talking about. It comes down to access, it comes down to fairness, right? But it also comes down to what we were talking about as it pertains to how the elections are run, how the process is run, what is done. Is there an innate sense of fairness that takes place? It comes down to representation. It comes down to access. I think you have to fold all these issues together to really answer that question.
Thank you very much. And then I know I want to be mindful of time. Do you have time for just a couple more questions?
I totally do.
Okay, awesome. Okay, let's see here. Let's look at the chat here and see if we got any other ones.
I mean, can I just answer more? I mean, since we have a little time, can I give you a little bit more of an expanded answer on restorative justice?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so let's take an example of like where this really counts and where this really matters and where it has a real impact, right? I want people to look up if they can. People ask, so why do you serve in this position? Why do you do this? And there are certain cases that define this position, and there are certain cases that basically make you say, this is why I'm doing it. This is why I care so much. And this is what it's really all about. And there's a case that I think folks should look up. It's Johnson Scott. These are 2 defendants, defendant Johnson, defendant Scott. If you type in those 2 names, you type in Bernstein, you should get my opinion. This is the case I'm probably the most proud of, because ultimately what happened in this case, and this, if you're asking about restorative justice and you're asking about these types of questions, this is the case that really defines what it's about. This is the case that really, I think, goes to the core of why we're having this conversation and why we're here tonight. What happened in this case? You had 2 young African-American men who basically were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for murder. But you know what? There's a problem. And you know what the problem was? They didn't do it. That's the problem. But they spent 18 years in prison for a crime they didn't commit. And the reason that I do this job and the reason that I do this work, and when you ask, okay, what are the critical things that a judge has to do? What are the critical things that a judge is responsible for? You know how many cases pass through the Supreme Court every single day, week, month, and year? What is critical is that you have got to be on the ball, because it's kind of like a rushing river. When a case comes up, if you don't act on that case, if you don't flag that case, it comes down as a denial. So if you don't catch it and that case comes up and you don't act on that case, I cannot emphasize this enough, it's a denial. And that person doesn't get to appeal again. And in Johnson Scott, this was a very important case, because basically when our office reviewed it and went through it, you could see it just didn't look right. There were inconsistencies, there were problems, there were all kinds of issues. And when you see a case like that, you need to stop it before it just comes down as a denial. And when you get involved in those kind of cases, you've got to really get involved. You've got to know the standards, you've got to know the evidence, but you've got to investigate, and you've got to do it because someone's life is hanging in the balance. And the reason that that case, I think, is so fundamental is because I ultimately wrote the decision that gave those two men their freedom. Johnson, Scott, Bernstein. You can read it and see kind of ultimately what happened and what ultimately occurred.
And that is a good point I want to stop on, because I do want to know, one of the great questions someone posted: who holds the judges accountable? Is elections the only way? Like who in your opinion holds the judges accountable?
Well, that's
And
the blessing. That's the blessing of elections, right? You do. The people on this call are the ones that basically hold judges accountable. You're the ones that decide who gets elected. You're the ones who decide who are you going to get involved with. You're the ones who decide who ultimately should get elected and who shouldn't. That's why I believe in elections. I think elections are a critical, very important way to choose judges. The federal system's a little bit more complicated because they're lifetime appointments. So that's a whole different conversation for the federal system. But for the purposes of our time here tonight, you do.
okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think that concludes our Q&A portion with you, Justice Bernstein. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for your work.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, now we will transition here. Okay, so now we're going to transition into hearing from some of our local community organizations, and also how others can get involved with electoral work. So we will go to yes, and now we will pass it over to Mothering Justice.
Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Aisha Wells again. I am coming to you from my bedroom because I have a broken ankle. Just a little FYI for my background. I always have to give my little disclaimer on that. But I work for an organization called Mothering Justice. I am the national care organizer. Within that organization, Mothering Justice, we advocate we're an advocacy organization that empowers Black women and mamas of color to take action on policy issues that will improve the quality of life for families in Michigan and across the country. We also have what we call our Mama's Agenda. Our Mama's Agenda includes affordable childcare, the right or the need for caregivers and mamas to have affordable childcare. Most people pay the equivalent of a rent or mortgage to afford childcare every single month, which is absurd. We also advocate for Black maternal health. Black women die 3 to 4 times more than their white counterparts. So we advocate for justice and in Black maternal health. And we also, our other point is our basic needs. So being able to have access to food, water, shelter, the basic right to those types of needs. And then the last one is paid family leave and paid sick time. In the role that I'm in, I do national care work, which correlates with having a national paid family leave policy, which the United States is one of the only countries in the world that does not have a universal paid leave policy. There are some states in this country that has it, but Michigan is not one of them. Right now, what we do have is a paid sick leave policy that is available to some Michigan workers, and I will allow Christina to talk more about that. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for sharing. And then we can go over to Christina.
Thank you, Aisha. I'm like, her headboard there is just so gorgeous. So I'm like, for a broken ankle, you are doing wonderful on Zoom. But yes, I am the state paid leave organizer for Mothering Justice. And I lead the My Time to Care Coalition, which is a coalition under Mothering Justice. And the reason that the Supreme court race is important to us is because that may be where we are headed with our court case that we currently have against our Michigan legislature. In 2018, the My Time to Care Coalition had a citizen-led ballot initiative to get everyone in Michigan access to paid sick time, as well as raising the minimum wage up to $12 an hour. We collected all of the signatures needed within our ballot initiative, over 380,000 signatures were collected, and that was quite a race to collect those. So we were rather excited, and our issue was supposed to make the ballots for every.
Oh, can't hear you. Okay.
What Christina was saying is that our issue was supposed to make it on the ballot in 2018, and it was not able to. So we did our due diligence. We did everything that we were supposed to do with a number of community organizations. And when it got to the Michigan legislature, the bill was gutted, and all of the parts that would have been able to work for so many more workers across the country for paid sick leave and having a minimum wage was gutted by our Republican-led legislature. And since then, we have been fighting with the My Time to Care Coalition to restore the original legislation. I think, Christina, if you want to try to see if you're back.
Yes, can you all hear me? I'm sorry there, my connection likes to chop out, especially when I'm on screen here. But yeah, currently where we are with our court case, we are in the Court of Appeals with that, and we have already won in a court of claims with the judge ruling that it was unconstitutional the way that the Michigan legislature adopted, amended, and gutted our policy language. They gutted our policy language significantly, leaving out over 40% of Michigan workers who still do not have access to a single paid sick day. And our pandemic, of course, has highlighted the need for having access to paid sick time and being able to stay home and take care of yourself. So we are rather excited that we have gotten that judgment from a wonderful, fair judge in the Court of Claims. And if we have to go to the Michigan Supreme Court, it will be very important that we have a fair judge there as well. So of course you all can see why we do need great representation there for us if we do have to head to the Michigan Supreme Court, because it is there where they can restore our policy language, granting everyone in Michigan access to paid sick leave, and our minimum wage will go up as of February 19, 2023. And for Mothering Justice, we are excited and supporting Representative Bowden Harris because not only is she a Black woman and a mother, she also supports all of our issues within our mama agenda, and our representation is rather crucial within the Supreme Court, because that will bring realization to our mama's agenda and make it solid and helping people to know that it is important and something that is needed.
Thank you so much. I do have a question from you guys' perspective as an organization. How would you say the Supreme Court impacts Black mothers, and why, from your perspective, would you say this race is crucial and important?
But for Black mothers, we need our voices heard. Our struggles definitely have proven to be different in all factual numbers. Like for our mama's agenda, we have Black maternal health. Over 80% of mothers are dying in the process of having birth. So having a woman of color in the Supreme Court is very major to us, having that representation and having someone there that can represent all of us there in that process as well.
Thank you so much. And also too, before we transition, there are some questions for you guys in the chat. If you want to check those out, just asking about some ways to collaborate. Yeah.
Yeah, so right now, if you'd like to get involved with Mother and Justice, you can go to motherandjustice.org, or you can go to our Facebook or our Instagram, and you can sign up to be a part of our fellowships. We do, right now we're doing our Mama This Movement Fellowship, which is our first national fellowship around the country. We have 100 women that we have over 100 women apply to be in the program. There's 100 women in the program right now. It started off with five women many years ago, and so we are expanding to be a national organization, and we would love for anybody who would like to volunteer and get involved with us to go to our website, and you can click on the join us or get involved button.
Thank you so much. And just before I let you guys go, someone did ask for Mother and Justice. How do we get Mother and Justice involved in the Mother's Day bailout, Black Mother's Day bailout? Recipient. Yeah.
So we are actually already involved in the Black Mamas Bailout on Mother's Day. We've helped the past few years with helping mamas with that effort. So we already are involved. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thank you guys for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, and now we will transition here. We will hear from Erica, I believe, about opportunities where people can get involved in election work and turning out the vote. And I will turn it over to Erica.
Thank you. So, as I said before, I'm Erica, and I'm one of the field volunteer coordinators at Michigan Liberation. And, you know, we all know that that voter turnout is traditionally pretty low at the midterms. I think that the number I saw when I looked it up was 40%. And I hear way too often about how the midterms, it's no big deal. It's just, I'm not going to vote this one. And I don't understand how people don't really realize that these really are so important. We are going to elect people and vote on issues that really do touch literally every aspect of our lives. Voting has never been more important than now, especially with the reproductive rights proposition on the ballot. So Michigan Liberation is holding texting parties to try to encourage people to vote. And we are getting together every Tuesday and Thursday night. We're going to meet next Tuesday. We have an in-person and a Zoom option for those who can't join us in person. We are going to do this, as I said, every Tuesday and Thursday, right up through the election. And I believe that somebody's going to put the link into chat for our volunteer form, where if any of you are interested in joining us for our texting parties, we would love to have you. Please fill out that form. We try to get together, we have fun, we have fellowship, we have tacos if we're in person or some other kind of food, and we try to get people the information they need to empower them to get out there and vote for the people who are going to take our values into consideration, not just the big corporations or the people with money who can lobby for, what they need. Real people, our people, we need to get them to vote. So if you could please fill out that form and join us for our texting parties. We're also going to have other opportunities. If anybody wanted to knock on doors or work in the phone bank, we would absolutely love to have you. We're also going to have some election protection work coming up in the future. We have a good time when we get together. So we have fun. Play hard, work hard. That is our motto. So I would love, love, love to have you all come and join us. Please do so.
Yes. I attended the last one. It was really fun. Free tacos. Great food. I'm in already just off of that alone. But no, it was awesome. Just being around everybody in the company, and the relational texting. People hear you a lot more when it's real people, right? Like, so yeah, awesome. Absolutely. Really cool. Yeah,
I think that it does for a lot of people really mean more when it comes from somebody you know, rather than just seeing a yard sign, right? We know what to say to our friends and family to make sure that they hear us.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And then you said the sign up information is already in the chat.
I don't have access to the chat, but I have asked that it be put into the chat. I did forward that information, so if somebody can pop it in there, that would be lovely.
Okay, yes, yes. We'll have our team throw it in there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. And then now I believe, let's see the time. Oh, okay. Yes. So one last campaign wants you guys to hear about. We have a Good Time, Restore Good Time campaign. And one of our organizers with Michigan Liberation is leading that, Demetrius Knuckles. And I'm going to add him on here to talk about that for a bit as another way you guys can get involved. Just 1 second, do that now. All right, go right ahead, Demetrius.
So I can speak, but you can't see me, right?
I cannot see you, no.
So am I supposed to be on the screen?
Yes, you are. Let me see. I'll fix it. But
But
go
nobody
ahead.
see my pretty face then.
Go ahead and
All
take
right,
it.
my name Demetrius Knuckles Ill, and let me just say I served 28 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections. I went to prison with the life sentence, life without parole sentence, and in 2012, the United States Supreme Court said that it was unconstitutional to sentence a juvenile to life without parole, to a mandatory term of life without parole sentence. So in 2017, I was resentenced to 32 to 60 years in prison. However, because I showed good behavior over the last 20 years of my prison sentence, the Michigan Department of Corrections gave me good time, which in other words, they gave me 4 years of good time back, which means that they take 4 years off of the bottom part of my sentence, which was 32 years. And I ended up getting out of prison in 28 years. So what I am trying to do for those brothers and sisters that I left behind is give them that same opportunity to a second chance, because they too have changed their lives. So right now I'm embarking on a monumental campaign that allows all of those brothers and sisters who we left behind to just have that opportunity to become a part of the community again, become a leader and a pillar in the community again, because of the fact that they changed their lives. So if I can get good time passed in Michigan, it was taken away in 1998. If I can get good time passed in Michigan, from 1998 to now is 24 years. A lot of those brothers and sisters have done at least 24 years that I'm talking about, as far as going way back to that date. And if I can get good time passed right now, women like India Porter, Siobhan Davis, and so many, I can name so many guys that I was around, they will be home because they showed good behavior. They will be home in less than 2 and 3 years from now. Some of them will be home today. Some of them will be reunited with their families today. And that's what we're trying to do. That's the fight that I'm up against right now. That's the fight that I plan on winning. And I look forward to people contacting me. I'm on Facebook Live every Wednesday with talking about good time to my audience. And I'm on Zoom every Thursday having a discussion on how we could effectively put together a comprehensive good time bill that politicians will and must obey, or unless they don't want to, live out their term, because we're going to try to get them the hell out of office. So that's the campaign that I'm with, and you could get with me. My name is Demetrius Knuckles Ill on Facebook, all social media platforms. I'm always doing something on good time.
Thank you so much. And can you, what is your email for attendees who do want to get involved?
My email is Demetrius that's DEMETRIUS at myliberation.org.
Thank you so
You can
much.
get with me right there. Let me know what type, if you want to play a part, if you want to do your part, just let me know. We can do this.
All right, thank you, Demetrius. And we'll put that in the chat as well for people who would like to get involved. Our next candidate will be on at 7 p.m. So I know this is a lot of information to digest. So we're going to take a 5-minute break to gather our thoughts, and then we'll be right back here at 7 p.m. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to check here and see if our next candidates are on. Then we can get started.
Hello.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much for joining.
Absolutely.
Yes, so I guess we'll jump right into it. Want to go ahead and introduce yourself and why you are running for the Michigan Supreme Court.
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm coming from another candidate forum, so thank you for accommodating me, and sorry for being a couple minutes late. But I'm State Representative Kyra Harris-Bolden. I currently represent Michigan's 35th House District, which includes the communities of Southfield, Lathrop Village, Beverly Hills, Bingham Farms, and Franklin. I'm a lifelong resident of Southfield, Michigan, went to Grand Valley State University for undergrad, went to the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law for law school. I practiced criminal defense work in 46th District Court. Thereafter, I was a judicial law clerk for the longest serving judge in the state of Michigan, Judge John A. Murphy, in Wayne County 3rd Circuit Court. I then went to work for Lewis and Monday, where I practiced civil litigation in many different practice areas before I successfully ran for the State House in 2018. And we hit the ground running. We have gotten 5 bills passed into law. I focused my work on criminal justice reform and protecting survivors of sexual assault and violence. And we're running for Michigan Supreme Court because the stakes couldn't be higher. And I'm honored and proud to be in this fight. And so with that, I will love to answer any questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Okay, so first question we have for you. If you had all the tools, what kind of future would you build?
That is a great question. You know, I think one of the reasons why I'm running, if those of you that know me know, I've run half of this race pregnant, and I'm running half of this race with a newborn at home, and she's 6 weeks old this week. And I really decided to run for this position because I had to think about the type of future that I wanted my child and all the children of Michigan to grow up in. And so if I could build a future, that would include an equitable justice system. And why do I say that? I believe that justice is a quality of life issue. Nobody is going to want to stay in a state or a nation where they are not treated fairly, where they're not seen and heard in our justice system. And I'll let you know, and a few folks know this story, but in 1939, my great grandfather was lynched in Tennessee after asking a store clerk for a receipt, and a lynch mob ensued. And he was beaten, castrated, and thrown into the local river. And the coroner actually deemed it an accidental drowning. And as a result, his murderers went free as a result of that piece of evidence and that determination. And we have to realize that it wasn't long ago where government sanctioned injustice was the norm. And so when I think about what a future looks like, or what kind of future do I want to build, it's an equitable one in our justice system. And that's what I can have a direct impact on. But I want my child and all the children of Michigan to feel seen and heard and know that they have a fair chance at success.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing your story. Our next question we have from one of our attendees. Who holds the judges accountable, in your opinion? Are elections the only way to hold them accountable?
So that's the best way to hold judges and justices accountable, is through your vote. Now we must realize that most judges have 6 to 8 year terms. And so while judicial races usually go under the radar, they are some of the most important positions, not only for our justice system, but because they tend to be there for a very long time. And mostly also they get the incumbency designation. And so a lot of times when people are going through their ballot, they'll say, well, I haven't heard anything about this person. And so I'm just gonna go ahead and go for the incumbents. But we need to be just as engaged with our judges and our justices as we are with our state representatives and our senators. I get calls to my office all the time about how I have voted, and I have to explain myself to the people of my district and to the state of Michigan sometimes. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have, that doesn't mean that you don't make determinations that you believe are right, because there are some times where I have to explain to my constituents why I made a decision, and we have to agree to disagree sometimes. I think that being a judge or a justice is a public service position. And so it is incumbent upon the public to know how your judges and justices are ruling. For example, I don't know if a lot of people know that in a 4-3 decision, the Michigan Supreme Court decided whether or not a gun-free zone, a school can enforce a gun-free zone. I don't know if people know that it was a 4-3 decision by the Michigan Supreme Court on whether the residents of the Flint water crisis were able to sue their government, right? Michigan Supreme Court is the last word on some of the most important and pressing issues of our time. If the Board of Canvassers deadlocks for any reason, we have learned just a couple of weeks ago with the reproductive rights petition, that issue goes to the Michigan Supreme Court. And so I think the first step, because you can do a recall petition and obviously there are elections, but you have to know what the judges and justices are doing in order to even get to that step of accountability. And I think part of that is incumbent upon the judges and the justices to educate the community about the decisions that they're making. But it's so easy for races like mine to go underneath the radar as far as accountability.
Thank you very much. And that leads us perfectly into our next question, just about accessibility and communication with the public. To what extent do you feel that there should be accessibility and transparency with the public if you were elected as a justice?
So I think one thing that's unique about me is, and something that I'll bring to the table, is I would be the only lawmaker on the 7-person panel of the Michigan Supreme Court. And why is that important? I'm already familiar with being accountable and transparent and accessible to my community. And I know that my job doesn't just stop at votes as a lawmaker. And I don't think that making rulings or decisions is the only job of a judge or a justice. I believe that there's an education component, which I talked about, and there's also an accessibility issue with our courts and our justice system. And so what a lot of people don't know is that the Michigan Supreme Court doesn't hear every case that's appealed to it. There's a select few, but there's an advocacy component to that, where if I see a case as a justice that's not quite right, I can advocate for the Michigan Supreme Court to take up that case. And it's because of my background and particular perspective that I might be able to see something that other people may not be aware of or find that's out of place, right? And so there are different things, not only education, but as far as access to the court at the Supreme Court level, that it really matters who is on your Michigan Supreme Court. And I believe that the Michigan Supreme Court should be reflective of the diversity of the state of Michigan. It is not meant to be a monolith. There's not meant to be 7 people that think the same. They have the same background and experience. And I'm excited that I can bring a unique perspective and a fresh perspective to the Michigan Supreme Court.
Thank you so much for your answer. Well, you may have already answered this, but How have your experiences with the criminal legal system shaped your views about the nation's system of crime and punishment?
Yeah, so I will start by saying this. I'm currently a state representative, and so my background is public. My votes are public, and usually people running for this position are pretty much kind of going background. We know that some have litigated and whatnot, but I have taken very public votes, and I have introduced legislation that is open to the public. So I'll start there. I will talk about a bill I was able to get passed into law and a bill that I've introduced that has gone nowhere. So one of the bills that I've gotten passed into law was a amendment to the Wrongful Imprisonment Compensation Act. And it was a very simple fix, but the way that the law was written, it shut people out of having access to justice and compensation. So I corrected that with a two-bill bipartisan legislation, and now more people have access to that fund, and people that were previously denied have a chance to reapply. And so that is very important, and that was a gap that we saw that we fixed. Another piece of legislation that has not gone anywhere that I actually worked on with one of the most conservative members of the Republican caucus was felony firearm. And so those that are familiar know that there's a 2-year mandatory minimum on a felony firearm charge. And so we introduced bills to roll back that 2-year mandatory minimum, because you know what? 80% of the people convicted of felony firearm are Black, right? So there is inequitable or unequal treatment amongst people in the state of Michigan concerning our laws. And it is our job, at the court to simply interpret the laws. But I think that just gives an insight into what I have worked on in my legal career, as far as, just noticing things and trying to make some changes.
Thank you so much for your answer. I will pivot now just to some of the audience questions. What is your position on cash bail and how it criminalizes poor and people of color?
I'm an official in my capacity in running for a nonpartisan statewide election. I'm not allowed to take public positions on issues. And that is because if I do, and that issue comes before the court, I can be seen as biased and I would have to recuse myself. So I cannot comment on, my personal philosophy on that. But what I can direct you to is my public record as a state representative and a member of the Judiciary Committee, and bills that I have sponsored and co-sponsored for that answer.
Thank you so much. And for our next question, how would you define the law versus ethics? Do you see it as two different things or not? Then please provide detail.
Yeah, so they're definitely two different things. Something can be unethical, but if it's not illegal, then there is no consequences or repercussions for it. And so I think for the most part, we try to legislate things that are ethical or unethical, but that's subjective. And so some people might think it's, for example, unethical for certain people to not pay taxes or things like that. But the law provides certain tax loopholes. And so you try to square that circle, but they're absolutely two different things. And not unfortunately, but that's why it's really important who you elect as your legislators in making laws, and make sure that they are legislating in ways that that comport with your values.
Thank you so much. And then go to another question here. So if Prop 3 does pass, is that something the Supreme Court can overturn?
So it's not something the Supreme Court would necessarily overturn or not. What would happen is if there are any specific cases or gaps or ambiguous legislation that falls into the cracks, that can work its way up the legal system. For example, when we passed our laws concerning cannabis, that was enshrined into our state constitution. However, there were questions practically that came up on transport or how many plants you're able to have according to the law and things like that. So there will be issues that come up as far as enacting the law should it pass, and those issues could make its way to the Michigan Supreme Court.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next question we have here. What do you see as unique about the Michigan Supreme Court? What do you see as the most pressing issue? Yeah, and you're planning to address it.
Yeah, so what's unique about the Michigan Supreme Court is one, that it's a 7-judge panel. And the other thing that makes it unique is it's the last word on our issues. There's nowhere else to go once the Michigan Supreme Court makes the decision. And it also is unique because they don't take every case that's appealed. It's not an appeal by right. And so again, there has to be an advocacy for the particular cases that the Michigan Supreme Court hears. So that's what makes it very unique. What are the most pressing issues? Well, we already know, and I think I stated this before, we know that issues concerning abortion will be at the Michigan Supreme Court. It's public knowledge that the governor has filed a lawsuit. It is likely that if we've already seen it when the Board of Canvassers deadlocked on the reproductive rights petition, that issue went to the Michigan Supreme Court. And there are likely to be, again, gaps, ambiguous language, or challenging the constitutionality of some provisions of the reproductive rights petition that will make its way to the Michigan Supreme Court. Voting rights. Who gets to vote, where they vote, how they vote will be solely and exclusively determined by the Michigan Supreme Court should those issues be challenged, right? We saw in Wisconsin in a 4-3 decision where they banned drop boxes, where they affirmed the banning of drop boxes, right? To my knowledge, that legislation hasn't been introduced in Michigan. I'm just giving an example of things that could potentially come to the Michigan Supreme Court. We know that LGBTQ issues can and will be heard at the Michigan Supreme Court. Earlier this year, the Michigan Supreme Court decided to include the LGBTQ community within Elliott Larson. So we're probably going to see more issues like that. We know that environmental rights can and will be at the Michigan Supreme Court. Again, any of the most pressing issues of our time will be heard at the Michigan Supreme Court within the next 1 or 2 years.
Thank you so much. And then I want to go to an audience question. So this question asks, some of us do not fully understand the full process and role of Michigan Supreme Courts in changing laws. How would you describe the process and access to you by what means?
So there has to be a court case, and that starts at the lower court level. So either at the circuit court or the district court. It will make its way to the Court of Appeals. And if that decision is appealed at the Court of Appeals level, then a few amount will go to the Michigan Supreme Court. And like I said, it's usually the most pressing issues that affect Michiganders. And I've already highlighted a couple of those. But again, there are so many issues that can be challenged legally, whether it's the Constitution, whether it's interpreting a statute. So it just depends. but it could be something as simple as, you know, the governor's petitions were challenged because of the size of a union bug, right? The reproductive rights petition was challenged because of spacing issues with the language. We are in a time where there are so many different challenges that can come up that could potentially work its way to the Michigan Supreme Court. And so I want to be very careful in using the terms, you know, small issues versus large issues. But really it's a mixed bag of things that can come to the Michigan Supreme Court that affect the way we live as Michiganders.
Thank you so much. And then I know you do have to go, so I'm trying to get to this one last question from one of the attendees. Okay, so we have an increasing number of exonerations in the state of Michigan. Many more are certain to exist. What are your thoughts on knowing that you recognize not all cases are heard at the Supreme Court level and that there is certainly a disparity?
Yeah, so I think I touched on that before. Again, the Michigan Supreme Court only hears a select few cases, but again, that's why it's important for the court to reflect the diversity of the state of Michigan with different backgrounds and perspectives, because there is an advocacy piece to it where you know, the law clerks that you hire can see something and say, hey, this is something we need to take a closer look at because there's some discrepancies here. Or I can do that as a justice as well. And so I can't, again, give you my personal thoughts on a particular issue. But what I can say is it's important to have folks that recognize and have a perspective of folks that, you know, that may not be represented on the Michigan Supreme Court currently.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time, taking time tonight and giving attendees information about the Supreme Court race and yourself. And good luck in the race this November.
Thank you. And I just want to say, for more information, go to boldenforjustice.com. Follow us on social media at Bolden for Justice, or follow my personal pages, Kyra H. Bolden, for more information. Again, my legislative record is public record. And so I invite you to find out more information about me as well as other people that are running in this race.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so now we will go to some election day reminders. And then some next steps for those who do want to get involved and work with Michigan Liberation. Let's see, so, okay, so the last day for Michigan residents can register to vote online with a state ID is on the 24th of October. And on the 4th of November, the last day residents can submit an absentee ballot request is on the 4th of November. Also on the 4th of November, we have the last day residents with disabilities can submit an accessible electronic absentee voter ballot application. And on the 8th, on election day, polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And also, when you are voting on November 8th, you can use proof of residency and do that till 8 p.m. at your city or town's clerk's office. And if you're in the lines at the polls and it hits 8 p.m., do not leave. You still have a right to vote and get your vote in before the night ends. And then just a last reminder about ways to get involved. So we do have the volunteer form that was posted into the chat, and we will send follow-up emails to everyone who registered about that for the texting parties to get out the vote. And then also the Supreme Court and ethics core team that Michigan Liberation has. I will also be sending that out via email if you would like to sign up for that. And that is all I have for you guys. And thank you all for joining our event. You guys have a lovely night. And yes, let's turn out the vote for this election. Take care.